Hello, friends, this is the first part of the video. Enjoy the video. Hey, Reddit. I'm writing this because I need to get it off my chest. I feel like my life has turned into one of those trashy soap operas, and I'm stuck playing the clueless husband who didn't see it coming. For some context, my wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 12 years. We have 2 kids, Ethan, 10, and Lily, 7. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Sure, we had our issues, what couple doesn't? But I thought we were happy. Sarah works part-time at an office downtown, and her schedule is all over the place. She started taking a taxi to work a few months ago because her car broke down, and we didn't have the money to fix it right away. At first, it seemed like a simple solution. She found a driver, Mark, who she said was reliable, and she stuck with him. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? She said it made her feel safer to have the same driver every day instead of taking random rides. I thought it was practical. But then the rides started getting longer. She'd leave early, saying she wanted to grab coffee before work, or she'd come home late, claiming traffic was a nightmare. I didn't push it. I figured she was just stressed, maybe needed some alone time to decompress. What really stuck out, though, was how much she talked about Mark. Mark told me this funny story about one of his passengers today, she'd say over dinner. Or, Mark recommended this new restaurant, we should try it. I remember laughing it off, joking, you talk about Mark like he's your new best friend. She just smiled and said, he's easy to talk to. That's all. Looking back, there were probably a million red flags I ignored. But at the time, I had no reason to doubt her. I was working extra hours to cover the bills, trying to be a good dad and keep things running smoothly at home. One Saturday, Sarah said she needed to run errands and called Mark to drive her, even though I was free and offered to take her. It's easier this way, she said, brushing me off. She was gone for hours. When she came back, she seemed different. Happier, almost glowing. She kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for watching the kids, and acted like everything was perfectly normal. But something didn't feel right. I didn't know it then, but that day was the start of something that would turn my world upside down. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's behavior started to change in ways I couldn't ignore. She was more distant, always glued to her phone, and her errands became more frequent. When I asked her about it, she'd roll her eyes and say things like, "Do you have to question everything I do? I'm just trying to keep this family together while you're always at work." That stung. I was working extra hours for her and the kids, but somehow, she made it sound like I was the bad guy. Then there was Mark. I didn't realize how much time she was spending with him until Ethan, our 10-year-old, let something slip one evening. "Mom was talking to Mark again today," he said casually while eating dinner. Sarah's face froze for a split second before she forced a smile. "Oh, you know how Mark likes to chat," she said, laughing it off. "Isn't that a little weird?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You're his passenger, not his friend." She rolled her eyes again. "Mark is harmless, Jake. He's just a nice guy who drives me to work. Not everything has to be a big deal." I dropped it, but something about the way she dismissed me didn't sit right. A week later, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise Sarah and spend some time together. When I walked through the door, I saw her in the living room, talking on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. Her tone was light, almost flirtatious. "No, Mark, I can't do that," she said, laughing softly. "What if someone sees us?" My heart sank. I cleared my throat, and she practically jumped out of her skin, fumbling to end the call. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just a friend from work," she said, avoiding my eyes. I didn't push it. At that moment, I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me. But the signs kept piling up. She started wearing makeup more often, even when she was just running errands. She'd come home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. And every time I asked her about it, she had an excuse. "You're imagining things," she said one night, her voice sharp. "I can't believe you don't trust me after all these years." I felt like I was losing my mind. Then, one evening, I overheard Ethan talking to Lily. Mom says Mark is funny, he said. Maybe he can come to my football game. I don't know why, but hearing my kids talk about Mark like he was some kind of family friend made my blood boil. I decided then and there that I needed answers. After overhearing Ethan's comment, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to know what was really going on between Sarah and Mark. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Sarah left for her usual ride with Mark, and as soon as they pulled away, I followed them in my car, keeping a safe distance. At first, everything seemed normal. Mark's taxi headed toward downtown, where Sarah worked. But instead of stopping at her office building, they took a detour, heading to a quieter part of town. My stomach churned as I watched them pull into the parking lot of a small cafe. They got out, laughing and talking like old friends, or something more. Sarah touched Mark's arm as they walked inside, and he leaned closer to her in a way that made my chest tighten. I parked down the street and waited. After about an hour, they came out, still chatting and smiling. Instead of heading back to the car, they walked into a nearby park. I followed them on foot, staying far enough back that they wouldn't notice me. My hands were shaking as I watched them sit on a bench, their heads close together. And then it happened. Sarah leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a full-on kiss, the kind we hadn't shared in months. My heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. I stood there, frozen, watching the woman I'd built a life with betray me in broad daylight. When they finally pulled apart, I turned and walked away, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew it wouldn't end well. I needed time to process this, to figure out what I was going to do. When Sarah came home that evening, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and even made dinner like everything was normal. I played along, but inside, I was boiling with anger and disbelief. Later that night, when she was asleep, I took her phone and started going through her messages. She always kept it locked, but I'd seen her enter her passcode enough times to know it by heart. What I found confirmed everything I'd seen that day, and then some. There were dozens of texts between her and Mark, filled with inside jokes, flirty comments, and plans to meet up. One message from Mark stood out. I can't stop thinking about this morning. You're amazing. Her reply made my blood run cold. You're not so bad yourself. Same time tomorrow? I put the phone back where I found it, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe this was happening. The woman I thought I knew, the mother of my children, was living a double life. And I wasn't sure what to do next. After reading those messages, I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah and Mark together, laughing, kissing, living a life that didn't include me. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I wasn't going to sit quietly and let this continue. Over breakfast, while the kids were busy arguing over cereal, I looked her straight in the eye and asked, Sarah, are you seeing someone else? Her reaction was instantaneous, too instantaneous. She laughed, a little too loudly, and said, What are you talking about, Jake? That's ridiculous. I didn't back down. I know about Mark. I know you've been meeting him outside of work. Her smile faded, replaced by a cold, defensive glare. You're being paranoid, she snapped. Mark is just my driver. If you can't trust me, that's your problem, not mine. I felt my hands clench into fists under the table. I followed you yesterday, Sarah. I saw you kiss him. For a moment, her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms and leaning back in her chair. You're spying on me now? That's disgusting, Jake. You've crossed a line. I crossed a line? I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You're the one sneaking around with another man while I'm working my ass off to support this family. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her voice low and venomous. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for excitement. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot. I left the house to cool off, driving aimlessly for hours, my thoughts spinning. Her words played over and over in my head, cutting deeper each time. When I finally came home, she was in the living room, watching TV like nothing had happened. She didn't even look at me when I walked in. That night, I started making a plan. If she wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. But first, I needed proof. Thank you very much for watching. Please support me by subscribing with a like and of course write a comment. Thank you and see you in another video.